Long before anyone could remember names or faces, there was a stretch of land at the edge of the village that people avoided. It lay quiet and wide, with soil darker than the rest, as if it had soaked up more than rain. Elders said the ground there listened. Some whispered that it remembered. The village itself was small and tired, shaped by years of hard seasons and harder lives. Houses leaned into one another as if sharing secrets. Smoke from cooking fires rose slowly each morning, carrying the smell of wood and struggle. Children played in narrow paths, careful not to wander too far. Everyone knew where not to step. Beyond the last hut, past the broken fence and thorny bushes, the forgotten land waited. No crops grew well there. Seeds sank into the earth and never returned as food. The wind moved differently across it, slower, heavier, as though it carried weight from another time. At night, the silence felt thick, pressing against the ears. People said the dead were close beneath that soil. No graves marked their rest. No stones bore names. Whatever happened there had been buried in a hurry, without prayers, without tears. The village had learned to live by not speaking of it. When questions came, they were brushed aside. When memories stirred, they were pushed back down, just like the bones beneath the ground. Stories still slipped through, though, carried by low voices and long nights. Some said travelers once passed through with gold and never left. Others claimed the land was fed with blood during a time of greed and fear. Children were warned not to dig there, not even to chase a lost ball. The soil will answer, elders would say, their eyes dark. And you may not like what it tells you. Gold, they said, slept under that earth. Not the kind meant to be found. Not the kind that brought joy. This gold was unfinished, tied to lives cut short and promises broken. It did not belong to the living. In the village, people believed that wealth taken from the dead never came alone. It carried shadows. It asked for balance. What was taken had to be paid for, one way or another. Seasons passed and the land stayed quiet. Grass bent under the sun. Rain washed the surface clean, but never deep enough. Whatever secrets lay below remained, waiting. The village learned to forget by pretending the place did not exist. But forgetting does not erase memory. It only hides it. The land remembered every step pressed into it. Every tear that fell. Every breath that was stolen and never returned. It waited patiently, knowing time favors the truth. One day someone would come with empty hands and a hungry heart. Someone with nothing to lose. That person would not be looking for gold. And when the soil finally broke open, it would not give up its treasure quietly. It would test the living just as it had swallowed the dead. The land had waited long enough. The orphan was called Kito, though no one remembered who gave him that name. It had followed him like a loose thread since childhood, thin and worn but still his. He was 14 years old, though hunger and labor had made his body look older. His hands were rough, cracked from work meant for grown men. His eyes, however, still carried the quiet ache of a child who had learned too early that no one was coming to save him. Kito woke before the sun each day. Not because he was disciplined, but because hunger did not let him sleep. His stomach spoke first, sharp and demanding, reminding him that the day had already begun. He rose from the mat in the corner of a borrowed hut, careful not to disturb the family that allowed him to sleep there. He was not their son. He was not their burden either. Just a shadow they tolerated. There had been no parents to teach him kindness or anger, no voice to guide him when he made mistakes. His mother died when he was too young to remember her face. His father was a name spoken once, then never again. No grave, no stories, no inheritance. Kito grew up on borrowed time and borrowed space. Each morning he worked where work could be found. Carrying water. Clearing weeds. Digging soil that did not belong to him. Payment came in scraps, sometimes in nothing at all. He learned quickly not to complain. Complaints were for people who had choices. The village looked at Kito with mixed eyes. Some felt pity and gave him leftovers when they could. Others watched him closely, as if hunger itself might make him dangerous. A few avoided him altogether, afraid that misfortune was something that could spread. Orphans, they believed, carried bad luck. When Kito passed through the paths, conversations softened or stopped. Not out of cruelty alone, but discomfort. He was a reminder of what the village could not fix. Of children who slipped through cracks no one wanted to see. At night, when work was done and the village grew quiet, Kito sat alone beneath the sky. He watched the stars and wondered if his parents saw the same ones before they died. He wondered if they would have been proud of him, or ashamed that he still had nothing to show for his life but tired bones and empty hands. What he wanted most was not food, though hunger ruled his days. What he wanted was dignity. To walk through the village without feeling small. To belong somewhere without asking permission. To be seen as more than a problem waiting to happen. Pain had shaped his morals more than any lesson. He knew what it meant to be ignored, so he noticed others who were overlooked. He knew the sharpness of hunger, so he never stole food even when temptation whispered loudly. He believed suffering should not be passed on, even when the world seemed built to do exactly that. Still, there were moments when bitterness rose in him like heat from the ground. Moments when he wondered why the land gave harvests to those who already had plenty, while he scraped at the edges of survival. Those thoughts scared him. He pushed them away, afraid of what he might become if he let them grow. Work took him often to the far edges of the village, where land was cheap because it was feared. The soil there was hard, dark, and stubborn. No one wanted to claim it. When offered a few coins to clear weeds or dig trenches in that place, Kito accepted without question. Hunger made courage out of necessity. The elders warned him once. Their voices were low, almost kind. They told him not to stay too long on that land. Not to dig too deep. Kito nodded, though he did not understand. Warnings meant little to someone whose life was already filled with quiet dangers. As he worked there, sweat mixing with soil, Kito felt something he could not name. A heaviness. Not fear exactly, but awareness, as if the ground beneath him was listening. He shook the feeling away and kept working. The land was just land, he told himself. Dirt did not think. Dirt did not remember. But at night, his dreams began to change. He dreamed of hands reaching upward through soil. Of voices calling without sound. He woke with his heart racing, the taste of earth in his mouth. He did not tell anyone. Orphans learned early that some burdens were theirs alone. Unseen, unheard, and unprotected, Kito carried his life forward one day at a time. He did not know it yet, but the land had already noticed him. And soon, it would place something in his path that would test everything hunger had taught him. The orphan carried nothing into that field but need. He would not leave it the same. Kito returned to the edge of the village at dawn, carrying his worn hoe across his shoulder. The air was cool and mist clung low to the ground, wrapping the land in pale silence. This was the forgotten field again, the one no one wanted. He had been told to clear a narrow stretch of it, just enough to mark a boundary. The work was simple, the pay small, but Kito did not complain. Work was work. He began as he always did, breaking the surface of the soil with steady strikes. The earth was heavy and dark, sticking to the blade as if unwilling to let go. Each swing sent a dull thud through his arms. Sweat gathered on his brow even as the sun climbed slowly, watching. For hours nothing changed. Just soil. Just silence. Then his hoe struck something that was not earth. The sound was sharp and wrong, ringing out like a cry. Kito froze. His heart jumped into his throat. He lifted the tool and struck again, lighter this time. Another sharp sound answered him. He dropped to his knees, brushing soil away with careful fingers. That was when he saw it. A faint glint, barely visible beneath the dirt. Yellow. Warm. Alive. Gold. For a long moment, Kito could not breathe. His hands trembled as he cleared more soil away. The metal caught the light, shining brighter with each touch. His mind raced, filled with thoughts he had never allowed himself to dream. Food without begging. Clothes without holes. A place to sleep where he belonged. Fear followed hope, close and sharp. He glanced around, half expecting someone to be watching. The field lay empty. The village felt far away. Even the birds were quiet. Kito dug carefully now, his excitement tangled with dread. The soil resisted him, thick and clinging as though it did not want to be opened. With each scoop the air felt heavier. His breath came faster. Soon more gold appeared. Not coins scattered by chance, but pieces gathered together, wrapped in rotting cloth. This was not lost wealth. This was hidden. As he dug deeper, the soil changed. It grew damp and dark, carrying a smell that turned his stomach. His fingers brushed against something hard that was not stone. He pulled back quickly, wiping his hands on his clothes, his heart pounding. Bones. The truth struck him all at once. This was no simple find. Someone had been buried here. Buried with their gold. Buried without a name, without a grave. Kito sat back, staring at the pit he had opened. The excitement drained from him, replaced by a deep, crawling unease. The land felt wrong now, as if it had shifted beneath him. He felt like an intruder, a thief, even though he had not meant to uncover anything at all. The wind moved through the field, brushing against his skin like a warning. He remembered the elder's words. Do not dig too deep. The soil will answer. It had answered him. Kito covered the pit as best he could, pushing the soil back with shaking hands. The gold weighed heavily in his pouch, heavier than it should have been. Each step back toward the village felt slower, as though the land was pulling at him, reluctant to let him go. By the time he reached the edge of the field, his hope had faded into something colder. He knew this discovery had changed everything. Whatever lay beneath that soil was unfinished, unforgiven. And now, because of hunger and chance, Kito had been chosen to hear its voice. That night, sleep did not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the glint of gold and the pale shape beneath it. The soil had refused to stay silent, and it had spoken his name. Sleep abandoned Kito that night. When it finally came, it brought no rest. His dreams were thick and heavy, pressing against his chest like wet soil. He dreamed of walking across the forgotten land while the ground shifted beneath his feet. Voices rose from below, not loud, but many. They did not scream. They whispered, calling him closer, pulling at his thoughts like unseen hands. He woke before dawn, his body cold and stiff. For a moment he did not know where he was. Then the memory rushed back. The gold, the bones, the field. His heart began to pound, and he sat up, breathing hard, listening to the quiet hut around him. The whispers did not leave with the dream. As he stepped outside, the village was just beginning to stir. Smoke curled into the air. Pots clanged softly. Yet beneath the normal sounds, Kito felt something else. A low hum like a distant song. He could not hear words, but he felt their weight. His steps slowed, his chest tightening as he passed near the forgotten land. That day, the elders gathered near the center of the village. Kito noticed how their eyes shifted when the field was mentioned. They did not speak openly, but their silence carried meaning. One elder pressed his lips together when Kito walked by, his gaze lingering longer than comfort allowed. Something had changed. Old stories began to surface, slipping out in pieces. A woman spoke of a traveler who vanished long ago. A man muttered about a time when fear ruled stronger than law. These were not tales told to children. They were fragments, broken and sharp, spoken only when people thought no one important was listening. Kito listened. Each night the dreams returned. He saw hands clutching gold, then loosening as life drained away. He felt anger that was not his own. Sadness older than memory. Sometimes he woke with dirt under his fingernails, though he had not touched the ground in his sleep. The gold called to him, not with promise but with weight. He felt watched, judged, and guided all at once. As if the dead were not asking for the gold back but for something else. Something unfinished. One evening, as the sun sank low, Kito passed an elder sitting alone. The old man did not look at him at first. When he finally did, his eyes were tired, filled with something close to regret. Some things, the elder said quietly, are buried because people are afraid of what will happen if they are remembered. Kito said nothing. He did not need to. The truth was already moving inside him. That night the whispers grew clearer. Not louder but closer. He dreamed of a face he had never seen, eyes open in the dark soil, waiting. Waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to listen. Kito woke with tears on his face and the knowledge that the gold was not just wealth. It was a voice. And it would not be silenced again. Kito tried to go on as if nothing had changed, but the gold would not let him forget. It rested where he had hidden it, wrapped in cloth beneath loose floorboards, yet its weight followed him everywhere. Even when he was empty-handed, he felt heavy as if the earth itself had settled inside his chest. For the first time in his life, Kito knew what it meant to have a way out. With the gold, he could leave the village. He imagined walking down the long road beyond the hills, never looking back. He pictured full meals, clean clothes, and nights without fear of being sent away. He could become someone new, someone not shaped by pity or suspicion. No one would call him Orphan anymore. Hope lit his thoughts like a fire. It warmed him. It scared him. At the same time, fear crept in quietly. Each dream grew more intense. Each day the whispers pressed closer. The gold did not feel like a gift. It felt like a test. Kito noticed how the ground near the forgotten field seemed darker, heavier, as if watching him decide. He told himself he had done nothing wrong. He had not killed anyone. He had not stolen. The gold had been buried long before he was born. Why should he suffer for someone else's sins? Yet his heart would not accept that answer. At night, he sat alone, turning the cloth-wrapped gold in his hands. The metal was cold. Too cold. It did not feel alive the way he had imagined wealth would. Instead, it felt patient, as though it was waiting to see who he truly was. Kito thought of the bones. Of how quickly hope had turned to dread in that pit. Of how the soil had resisted him, as if warning him away. He remembered the elder's words. Some things were buried out of fear. What fear had created this grave? The village began to change around him. Conversation stopped when he entered a space. Eyes followed him longer than before. He sensed questions forming, sharp and dangerous. Someone knew, or guessed. The gold promised escape, but it also built walls around him. Kito stood at the edge of the field one evening, the sun bleeding into the horizon. He imagined walking away, letting the land keep its secrets. But the whispers rose again, soft and firm, like a hand resting on his shoulder. This gold was never meant to be found. It had been hidden, not lost. Buried with intention. Left behind as part of a story that had not ended. Kito clenched his fists, torn between hunger and conscience. Between a future of freedom and a past that refused to stay buried. For the first time he understood that choice itself was a burden. And no matter what he chose, something would be taken from him. As night fell, Kito knew the land was waiting. So were the dead. Kito returned to the field the next morning, the cloth-wrapped gold heavy in his satchel. His hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from the weight of responsibility pressing against his small shoulders. He had made a choice, though he did not yet fully understand it. He would uncover the truth. The whispers, the dreams, the heavy silence, they were all part of something greater than himself. He dug carefully, respecting the soil now, feeling its reluctant resistance under his fingers. With each shovelful, fragments of the past revealed themselves. Pieces of wood, rotted and splintered. Small scraps of cloth that once had held fine things. And finally, more bones. Not scattered or broken, but arranged as if someone had tried to honor what had been taken. Kito pressed his hand against the earth, closing his eyes. The dead were here and they were speaking. Not with words he could hear, but with a presence he could feel. The gold was not simply treasure, it was a witness, a remnant of lives stolen, promises broken, and justice denied. He remembered the whispered stories from the village. A traitor who vanished, a betrayal among men who should have protected one another. Now it was clear. The bones belonged to someone who had been wronged. The gold had been hidden after a murder, left in the earth by those who feared punishment, guilt, or the truth coming to light. Kito's stomach churned. The temptation to keep the gold, to take it and vanish into a life of safety and comfort, flared again, but it no longer held the same appeal. This wealth was not his. It was a symbol of suffering, a weight of history that demanded recognition. Every coin whispered a story of life cut short. Every fragment of gold carried shame, grief, and vengeance. He sat back, pressing his forehead against his knees. The field was silent now, yet he could feel the eyes of the dead upon him. They were not angry. Not exactly. But they demanded he see what had happened. That he acknowledge the past and act with honesty. Kito thought of the village, of the people who had looked away for generations. He realized that they had buried more than bodies, they had buried responsibility. They had chosen comfort over truth, silence over justice. And now, in their absence, the burden had fallen to him. A chill ran through him as he lifted another fragment of the cloth. Beneath it, more gold gleamed, but he no longer saw riches. He saw history and injustice and a story that could not be ignored. He felt a strange sense of connection to the dead, as if the wrongs of the past were tied to his own survival, his own conscience. Kito understood then that the land had chosen him. Not because he was greedy or because he was strong, but because he had nothing to lose. And that nothing gave him the courage to act where others had failed. He gathered what he could carefully, not to take it for himself, but to protect it until he understood what must be done. Each movement was deliberate, each touch respectful. He whispered apologies he did not fully understand, a small prayer to honor the lives disrupted by betrayal. For the first time he saw clearly, the gold was not wealth. It was a story. A debt. A witness to truth long denied. And the dead would not rest until that truth was faced. Kito stood in the fading light, the weight of both the gold and his new responsibility pressing him down. He knew his life would never be simple again. Hunger would still gnaw at him. The village would still judge him. But he was bound to something larger than survival now, a moral thread that connected the living to the dead, the past to the present, and him, a lonely orphan, to the unfinished story he could not abandon. As dusk settled, the whispers softened into silence. Yet the field was no longer quiet, it was alive with expectation. Kito felt it deep in his bones. The truth beneath the bones demanded action. And he would not run from it. The land had spoken. And now he had to answer. Kito returned to the village carrying more than just dirt and gold. He carried knowledge. And knowledge in a place built on silence was dangerous. At first he tried to keep his thoughts to himself. He spoke little, smiled rarely, and avoided the elders who had once offered warnings disguised as advice. But the truth has a way of surfacing no matter how careful you try to hide it. His manner had changed, The way he moved, the way he looked at the field, the way he held himself. People noticed. Whispers followed him like shadows. It started with small things. A shopkeeper would hesitate before giving him a loaf of bread. Children who used to play near him stepped back, suddenly wary. And elders, the ones who had once warned him about the forgotten land, began to glance at each other with tight, unreadable expressions. Something had shifted. One afternoon, Kito overheard a conversation near the well. Two men spoke in hushed tones, words sharp and bitter. "He's found it," one said. "The gold. The bones, it's him." "He shouldn't know," the other replied. "If the village learns, they'll blame us," the first whispered. "Everything we buried, everything we hid." Kito's heart pounded. The village's silence had not been simple fear or tradition. It had been complicity. They had all known. They had all looked away while lives were stolen, graves left unmarked, debts unpaid. And now the dead demanded acknowledgement. Even the kindest villagers avoided his gaze. Some openly sought to profit. A few whispered about helping him keep the gold, using it to settle old debts, by comfort, by respect. Others wanted it buried again, hidden, forgotten. They feared exposure. They feared judgment. And worst of all, they feared the reckoning that the soil seemed to demand. Kito realized in that moment that the burden of truth was his alone. The village had chosen silence, and in choosing it, they had made him their witness. Their fear made him powerful, dangerous even though he was only a boy. He walked through the streets, noticing familiar faces twist with suspicion or greed. Old friends kept distance. Neighbors cast sidelong glances. He felt every eye on him, weighing his intentions, predicting his next move. The weight of expectation pressed down harder than the satchel of gold at his side. At night, the whispers returned. Not from the dreams this time, but from the villagers themselves. Rumors spread. Some suggested Kito should be watched. Others implied he had taken more than gold. He had unearthed secrets the village was meant to forget. Some nights, he heard threats through the thin walls of the hut he slept in. A warning. Or a promise. Kito could no longer pretend that the field was only a place of earth and bones. It had become a mirror reflecting the village's hidden sins. He understood now that the land had not only remembered the dead, it had remembered the living. Every unspoken crime, every denial of justice, every small act of cowardice had left its mark. And he, the orphan, had been chosen to carry their reflection. The pressure was suffocating, but Kito did not falter. The gold weighed more than any coin. It carried the dead story, the village's guilt, and the burden of justice. To ignore was impossible. To act recklessly could destroy him. He understood one bitter truth. Knowing the secret made him dangerous, even to those he had once considered neighbors. And yet he also understood that no one else would face it. The village had buried its sins deep, but the soil had refused to keep them hidden. Kito clenched his fists, feeling the rough cloth of the gold beneath his fingers. He had been chosen, yes, but he would also be the one to decide how this story ended. The village's complicity had put them all at risk, but the land had entrusted him with the chance to make it right. And so, with the night settling over the quiet houses, Kito made a silent vow. He would not run. He would not hide. The truth had surfaced and he would carry it no matter the cost. The land had demanded justice and now so would he. Kito stood at the edge of the forgotten field, the sun sinking low behind the hills, painting the sky in blood-red streaks. The air smelled of damp earth and old secrets. In his hands, the gold lay wrapped in cloth, heavy with the weight of lives it had never belonged to. He had come this far and now there was no turning back. For the first time, Kito saw the full scale of what he faced. One path was clear. Take the gold, leave the village behind, vanish into the world beyond. He could finally escape hunger, fear, and loneliness. He could live a life free from pity and suspicion, free from the whispers that haunted his nights. The thought tempted him fiercely. He imagined smooth roads, soft beds, and warm meals that did not vanish before he could savor them. Freedom. Comfort. Safety. But another path stretched before him, darker and harder. It demanded that he face the truth beneath the soil, that he confront the village's complicity, and that he honor the dead whose voices had whispered through dreams and earth. That path offered no safety, no comfort, and no applause. It promised hardship, ridicule, and danger. And yet, something in Kito's heart pulled him toward it. He thought of the faces of the dead, pale and silent beneath the soil. They had been forgotten, betrayed, and buried in secrecy. Their gold had been stolen, their graves left unmarked. They did not demand wealth, they demanded recognition, justice, closure. and somehow Kito knew it could not be bought or ignored. The whispers of the field rose around him, soft at first, then firm as if the soil itself were speaking. "What will you do?" it seemed to ask. "Will you honor us or will you run?" Kito's stomach knotted. Hunger clawed at him. The promise of a life beyond the village beckoned like a siren. He could vanish tonight and never look back. No one would follow. No one could stop him. And yet, he felt the weight of every choice he had ever made, every day he had survived without guidance or love. He remembered the lessons suffering had taught him, that taking without regard for others left a mark deeper than hunger, deeper than shame. He remembered the elders' warnings, the whispers in the night, and the silent eyes of the villagers who had looked away. Kito closed his eyes, clutching the gold to his chest. His heart pounded, torn between desire and conscience. The future stretched before him like two roads, one paved with comfort and the other with responsibility. One would bring temporary peace, the other demanded courage he was not certain he possessed. The wind shifted through the field, carrying the scent of earth and rain. It brushed against his face like a hand, gentle but firm. The whispers rose again, patient and relentless. Kito understood at last. This was no longer about hunger or fear or even himself. The gold had never been his to claim. The dead had chosen him not to escape but to act. He took a deep breath, tasting the cool air. The decision was terrifying, but it felt right. He would not run. He would not take what was never meant to be his. He would face the village, face the history, and honor those who had been silenced. Kito's fingers tightened around the cloth. The weight of gold in his hands was nothing compared to the weight he now carried in his heart. The weight of truth, justice, and moral courage. Tonight, the orphan would make a choice that would change everything. And in choosing the harder path, he would finally step into the person he had always been meant to become. The land waited. The dead waited. And Kito at last chose to answer. The night was quiet, but Kito's heart pounded as he carried the cloth-wrapped gold back to the forgotten field. Moonlight spilled across the earth, painting the soil in silver and shadow. Each step felt heavy yet purposeful. He knew now that this gold was not a prize, not a means to escape. It was a burden, a story, a responsibility he could not ignore. He reached the pit he had uncovered weeks before, now overgrown slightly with wild grass. Kneeling, he carefully unwrapped the cloth, revealing the gold and the pieces of rotting cloth that had held it. His hands shook, not from fear but from reverence. He placed the gold gently back into the earth, arranging it as neatly as he could. Every coin, every piece, was returned with acknowledgement. Then he worked to cover the pit, pressing the soil firmly over it. As he did, he whispered apologies, not to the gold but to the lives it had belonged to. "I am sorry," he said softly. "I will not forget you. I will make sure others remember." The wind shifted through the field, carrying a subtle warmth as if the land itself approved. The whispers that had haunted him for so long softened, turning into a quiet hum of acceptance. Kito felt the weight on his chest lift just a little, though the responsibility remained. He had acted, faced the truth, and honored the dead. That, for now, was enough. The next morning, Kito approached the village differently. He did not flaunt what he had done, nor did he boast of the gold. Instead, he spoke carefully, asking questions, listening to old stories, and piecing together the fragments of history the village had tried to hide. Slowly, the elders began to open up, sharing names, dates, and events that had long been silenced. Kito wrote it down, committing the past to memory, ensuring that the dead would not be forgotten again. Some villagers were angry. They had hoped the gold, and the story, would remain buried forever. Others were ashamed, realizing their silence had contributed to injustice. A few, unexpectedly, showed him respect, seeing in him courage they themselves had lacked. The village began to shift, slowly in response to the truth Kito carried. Over the following weeks, Kito returned to the field many times, planting small markers, leaving simple offerings of flowers and water. He did not need recognition for this. The act itself brought a sense of peace, a quiet acknowledgement that some debts could be paid without wealth, through respect and memory alone. The land, once heavy and brooding, seemed lighter now. Grass grew more evenly. Birds returned to the trees near the field. The whispers faded into the hum of life, as if the dead could finally rest knowing their story had been told, their gold returned, their memory honored. For Kito, life did not suddenly become easy. Hunger still visited, and the villagers still watched him with suspicion at times. But the burden he carried now had purpose, and purpose brought dignity. He had faced temptation, danger, and solitude, and emerged with more than survival. He had earned respect, both from the living and the dead. In returning what was never meant to be taken, Kito discovered a deeper inheritance. The knowledge that righting a wrong, even when it is dangerous and lonely, leaves a legacy far greater than gold. The village learned slowly, but they learned. Some truths cannot remain hidden forever, and some debts must be paid in courage, not coins. Kito looked over the field one last time as the sun rose, golden light spilling across the soil. The earth was quiet. The whispers had ended. The dead were at peace. And for the first time in his life, Kito felt a sense of belonging, not because he had wealth or a home, but because he had acted with honesty, courage, and heart. The field had tested him. He had passed. And now it was ready to rest. The seasons turned, one after another, carrying the village through sun and rain, harvest and drought. Kito had changed, though no one could have guessed it by a glance. He still carried the marks of labor on his hands and the lines of hunger on his face. But inside he was different, stronger, steadier, quieter in the ways that mattered. The villagers had begun to notice. Not because he demanded respect, but because he had earned it. Children no longer stepped back from him in fear or pity. Neighbors offered help without hesitation. Even the elders, once wary and judgmental, met his eyes now with a hint of trust, as though they recognized the courage it took to face what they could not. The forgotten field had changed too. Grass grew thicker, wildflowers bloomed in corners that had been barren for decades. Birds returned to its edges, singing without hesitation. The soil, once heavy with secrets, now lay quiet and light. Kito would walk its paths sometimes, not to dig or uncover, but to remember. He left small offerings, flowers, water, even stones, to honor the lives buried beneath. It was not wealth nor reward that drew him there. It was respect, a recognition that some things are far more valuable than gold. Kito had inherited something no coin could buy: purpose. He had inherited the knowledge that actions, even those taken by a single person, can heal old wounds. The dead had rested. The village had faced its history, and slowly, it had begun to mend. And Kito himself had learned another truth. Life would always carry hardship, hunger, and loneliness at times. But when one acts with honesty and courage, when one honors what is right rather than what is easy, a different kind of wealth emerges. It is the wealth of dignity, of moral courage, of legacy. It is a richness that neither time nor circumstance can steal. At night, Kito would sit beneath the stars, the same stars he had watched as a lonely boy. He felt a connection not to what he had lost but to what he had earned. The whispers of the dead were gone, replaced by a quiet sense of balance. The land no longer demanded, no longer tested. It rested. And so did he. Kito had found something far greater than gold. He had found himself. And in finding himself, he had given the village and the dead beneath the soil a gift far more enduring: the certainty that memory, truth, and courage can outlast even the deepest shadows. The orphan who had once wandered alone now walked with purpose, carrying a legacy that no one could take away. And in that inheritance he discovered the true meaning of riches. The field remained quiet, the village slowly healed, and Kito at last belonged, not to wealth, not to pity, but to the unbroken thread of honor, justice, and heart. The wind had changed. It no longer carried the weight of secrets, but a calm stillness that seemed to settle over the village like a soft blanket. The seasons had passed slowly, each one marking a small transformation. Rain fell and soaked the earth, washing away the faint stains of past sins. The sun returned each morning, warmer, brighter, promising growth even where life had seemed impossible. And in this rhythm, Kito walked through the village no longer as a shadow, no longer as the orphan with empty hands and hollow eyes, but as someone who carried a quiet power, earned not by strength or wealth, but by courage and conscience. The field where the gold had been returned was alive now. Grass had grown thick and green, bending gently under the wind as though bowing in gratitude. Small wildflowers peeked through in patches, delicate bursts of color against the dark soil that had once held so much sorrow. Birds returned, their songs filling the dawn with melodies that had long been absent. Even the soil seemed lighter, no longer heavy with whispers, but at peace with the world above it. Kito often walked its paths at dawn or dusk, carrying no tools, seeking nothing. He would kneel, place a stone in a careful circle, or pour a cup of water into the earth, small gestures that honored the lives buried beneath. These acts were quiet, private, and deeply personal. No one forced him to do it. No one even asked. He did it because he understood now what it meant to respect life, even after it had been taken too soon. The village itself began to breathe differently. It was subtle at first. A neighbor smiled at him in passing, a child dared to walk near him without fear, the elders exchanged nods that once would have been impossible. Their suspicion, their quiet judgment, had not disappeared overnight. They had carried decades of silence and complicity in their hearts. But Kito's choices had shifted something in the balance. By facing the truth, by returning what was never meant to be taken, he had forced them to confront their own past in ways they could not ignore. Some were ashamed. Some were angry. Some tried to deny it even now. But others, fewer perhaps but more important, looked at him with a quiet reverence, a recognition of the courage it takes to stand alone, to choose right over safe, to face what others dare not. Kito himself had changed more than anyone else could see. Hunger still came for him sometimes, sharp and demanding, reminding him of nights spent with empty stomachs and calloused hands. Work was still hard, still tiring, still unfair. But he carried a new strength, one that did not come from muscle or coin. It came from knowing that he had done the right thing, even when the easier path had tempted him with comfort and safety. That knowledge was heavier than any gold, and yet it rested more lightly on his shoulders than the loneliness and shame he had carried for so long. He felt it settle in him, a quiet, unwavering presence, the inheritance of conscience. One morning, Kito sat beneath the old baobab tree at the edge of the village, its massive roots curling into the soil like fingers holding secrets. He watched the sun rise, spilling gold across the rooftops, painting the walls of the huts in warm light. A group of children passed by, laughing and chasing each other, and for the first time, one of them stopped to wave at him. Kito waved back. There was no fear, no hesitation, just the simple acknowledgement that he existed and that he belonged. Belonging was a strange sensation, one he had hardly known before. It was not the comfort of wealth or the protection of a family, but something more profound. Acceptance earned by living honestly, acting with courage, and facing truth even when it demanded everything of him. He thought back to the field, to the bones, to the gold that had tempted him so fiercely. It had not been treasure in the way he had imagined. It had been a test, a mirror showing him not only the sins of the past but the strength he possessed to act rightly in the present. He had learned that some wealth is not measured in coins or jewels, but in choices made when no one else is watching, in actions taken when the easier path offers escape and comfort. That knowledge, he realized, was a fortune beyond all gold. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, he felt the whispers of the dead return, not as accusatory voices but as quiet affirmations. The field no longer demanded. It did not haunt. It offered presence, a reminder that what was lost had been honored. And Kito listened. He listened to the rhythm of the wind through the grass, to the soft murmur of distant streams, to the tiny heartbeat of life that had been restored where death had once claimed dominion. Kito's understanding of inheritance had shifted too. In his youth he had thought inheritance meant food, clothing, shelter, or money, the things the living could offer the living. Now he knew it was something far deeper, the inheritance of responsibility, of courage, of the duty to remember and honor those who could not speak for themselves. The dead had left him a gift he had not asked for and could not refuse, the chance to act rightly, to restore balance, and to leave behind a world slightly better than the one he had inherited. He thought often of the villagers. Some would never truly understand, perhaps, the lessons the field had taught him. They would continue to make choices from fear, from greed, or from the simple desire for comfort. But Kito had become something beyond their judgment. He had inherited not just a moral clarity but the ability to live by it. That inheritance was lasting, unshakable, and profound. As the weeks turned to months and the months to years, Kito continued his quiet work. He planted small trees along the edge of the forgotten field. He tended the soil carefully, letting it heal naturally, allowing life to flourish. He taught children stories, not all at once, not all of the grisly truth, but stories of courage, of honor, of the importance of remembering what had been hidden. He guided them gently, passing along the wisdom he had earned through fear, temptation, and suffering. The field became a living memory, a place of reflection and reverence rather than fear. And Kito himself began to heal. Loneliness did not vanish entirely, it never does, but it lost its sharpness. Hunger and hardship were still parts of his life, but they no longer defined him. He had discovered a rhythm of living that honored both the living and the dead, a way to walk through the world with integrity and heart. One evening, long after the gold had been buried and the bones rested, Kito sat beneath the baobab tree once more. The wind was soft, carrying the sense of soil and grass, of life and renewal. He closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the land beneath him, the echo of the dead, and the quiet strength of the village beginning to change. In that stillness, he understood fully what he had gained. Not wealth, not fame, not recognition, but the certainty that he had done what was right. Kito had inherited something no one could take from him. the knowledge that he had acted with courage, that he had honored the truth, and that he had created a bridge between the living and the dead. It was an inheritance of conscience, of heart, and of legacy. And that inheritance, he realized, was the richest of all. The field remained quiet, peaceful, and alive. The village had begun to heal in subtle, uneven ways, but the path forward was steady. Kito had earned a place in both worlds, not as an orphan defined by lack, but as a young man defined by his choices. He walked through life with a purpose no gold could buy, a moral compass sharpened by hardship, temptation, and courage. And as the stars emerged one by one above the village, twinkling softly like distant lanterns, Kito smiled. He finally understood the true meaning of inheritance. It was not what you were given. It is what you choose to carry, what you choose to honor, and what you leave behind for others to follow. The orphan who had once wandered alone now walked with quiet dignity. The dead beneath the soil were at peace. The land, once heavy with whispers, had released its burden. And Kito at last had found a home not in wealth or comfort, but in the unbroken thread of courage, truth, and heart, a legacy that no one could ever take away. In the end, that inheritance was worth far more than gold.